We are in November.
Oh, what does that mean?
That means it is, well, for some of us, No Nut November.
There's no squirrels, or?
No squirrels, exactly. Well, we're back again.
And what are we talking about today?
Well, let's go a little bit over, what is No Nut November? And we're also going to be jumping into the choice to come or not to come.
That's a curious question.
That is the curious question.
Yes. All right, so tell me a bit, for those of us uneducated in squirrel language, what is No Nut November?
Oh my goodness. No Nut November is the month where it's kind of become a trend that men do not ejaculate.
Oh.
And yeah.
Why?
Well, I think the idea is to kind of practice discipline. This is the thing. I think there's kind of a conflation with No Nut November, no FAP, that if you masturbate, which means you're also going to ejaculate and you're also going to watch porn.
Okay.
And these three sort of like are the perfect storm that come together, and they're sort of inseparable.
Okay.
So to have a No Nut November in one ways is a way to go, okay, well, I'm cutting out my masturbation so that way I can maybe get over porn addiction, and I can also get over my addiction to ejaculating.
So it's a positive thing, or at least the intention.
The intention, I would say, is positive.
Okay.
However, there was a recent study, and they're looking at the latency of ejaculation during a sexual experience with a partner. And they found that granted, I think this study is also a little bit sketchy the way that they did it. They had two groups. One group was a group of men who would not stimulate themselves for 10 days at a time. And then they had men that would be having sex, I think it was like twice a week.
It's like torture or something?
Well, and then they would have them have sex with their partner, and they noticed the men that were having sex twice a week, they actually performed better, meaning that they lasted longer, versus those that were going 10 days without and then having sex, and then they wouldn't last as long. Now, the issue that I have with this study is that if you just straight up stop stimulating yourself, then you're not really moving your sexual energy, and then all of a sudden you just kickstart it by jumping into the sack with your partner, and it's like there's like a buildup there, as opposed to actually learning how to harness and kind of stream this through your body.
It kind of reminds me when I was a professional dancer, like contemporary modern dance, and I trained 7 days a week.
Yes. And
occasionally we had like a day off, and I hated those days. You would think I'd actually like a day off, but why I hated taking time off from my art, my sport, was that getting back into it was harder than if I just consistently moved 7 days a week. It was better than if I had like long breaks, or like for me, a day was a long break. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is that the body does need to have breaks.
Rest,
and there is something about breaking habits that could be bad. So, for instance, if you are not able to focus on work because you're always just like masturbating, or like because you're basically watching porn all the time, or if masturbation always goes with porn, or you feel that you're losing energy because you're coming 3, 4, 5 times a day, like to actually break away from that, sometimes you just need to like.
Is it coming or nutting? I'm getting confused.
So yes, nut is a slang for coming, which is also a slang for ejaculating. Not everyone knows actually even the word come is.
All right. So that's what I want to ask. Like, what do we mean by coming? Because I remember, I think it might have even been my first sexual experience, or somewhere in the early days, a lover, like afterwards said, so, did you come? And I remember panicking, like, oh my God, what is that? And did I do it? Did I not do it?
I'm still here. I didn't leave, so I guess I'm still coming, but I've already arrived.
Am I supposed to do it? Am I not supposed to do it? But something in me said, just say yes. Just say yes. Whatever the case is, say yes. And I was like, yes. He's like, oh, thank God. I was like, okay, I said the right answer, but I still completely lost. And it took me years to figure out like what coming meant, at least for me as a woman. And essentially it's related to having an orgasm.
Yes.
And in those days, the way orgasm was described, I didn't believe I was having them. Now, what I understand about orgasm, I was having a ton of them, just not in the typical descriptive way of an orgasm.
Well, this is one of the things that I do think is good about No Nut November, is if you're practicing semen retention in the sense of I'm still going to be like engaged sexually, which this is not how most people do it, but then I'm going to actually like learn to increase, one could say edging, which is more kind of how you can stay close to having an orgasm but without going over the edge. The ability just to be able to regulate yourself there better. But even then, I would say, and this is how I really encourage people, and so actually I'm doing a no nut mastery
master your nut.
Yeah, master your nut as a reframe for No Nut November, which is really a part of my YAFAT program, is how do you actually last longer by feeling more pleasure, but not just in that one time, but actually how can you then start to, over days, decide to have ejaculatory choice and actually build up that pleasure sensation. So you're actually boosting your pleasure capacity. And this leads to a lot of things with then like the benefits like towards like being with another partner, but we'll get into that a bit.
I'm eager for this question because it's related and we're still describing what coming is.
Yes.
So can a man come and not jizz or nut or squirrel?
Jizz again is another slang for ejaculation for those of you out there. Now, yes, a man can have an orgasm without ejaculating.
Okay.
Now, a lot of times that's going to actually feel different. And maybe we should just go to like what the standard kind of sexual response cycle is, which is both for men and women. Because again, this conversation about to come or not to come is equally important for men as well as women. So we're going to define it in this way.
Okay.
So that way then we can kind of address it for both sexes. So the standard kind of cycle response to arousal is that you have, you get excited.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you like that turn on, you're like, zzz.
That's a good one.
Then there's kind of that plateau, where you're just like in this state of pleasure.
Okay. So I'm excited.
It doesn't mean you get bored.
Oh, okay.
It means that it's gone up like this and you're like, yeah.
Or like you're cruising altitude.
Yeah, you're cruising altitude. There you go. And then there's the orgasm. The engines blow out. No,
Whoa.
no, that's not right.
Fireworks.
And then it's called resolution.
Not crashing the plane.
Well, that's the thing. There's a lot of people, though, the resolution it's speaking to that refractory period, which, it's where the erection goes away. You're not able to get erect again. By the way, we're not just talking about a penis. It can also be the
engorgement of the vulva.
Clitoris. Yep. And the whole, yes, exactly. The whole CUV complex, clitoral urethral vaginal complex, gets filled with blood. But if you were to look like specifically at the clitoris and the legs, like the penis, they swell out.
And then the clitoris actually
rises. I mean, it's like around like 400 to 500 times like the size jump that can happen.
Jeez.
And then it goes down. But the big thing is that feeling of, and how can you sense that has this actually happened if it's not something easily to like see visually? It's that, whoa, don't touch me. Like, it doesn't feel good now.
That's the refractory part, or the crashing in the airplane.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So there's a crash. There's probably a hormonal dip as well, I'm imagining.
Well, there are some chemical changes that at the beginning, as you're having sex and everything leading up to orgasm, Nicole Krauss really goes deeper into this, that she says all the health benefits are actually that period before this traditional form of orgasm. But then after, those dopamine levels dip down, and then prolactin for up to 2 weeks later goes up. Now, the interesting thing about prolactin is that it kind of is like the desire killer. So like your sexual desire goes offline.
Interesting. I'm excited that we're going to talk more deeply about this, especially in the second half, because I really think that the way science has looked at sex is done almost like the way animals have sex. So in a very super, like just biological, two bodies coming together. Here's the most normal way. If there was no sex ed, this would happen. But human beings are extraordinary. We can go from being like unable to walk as a kid to like supreme athletes. And
building airplanes and then flying.
And doing everything. Yeah. So there is a space and a place to train people with erotic conditioning, with physical conditioning, with sexual conditioning, where we can, I think, surpass this basic chart.
Well, and this is where I think it's important to look at pleasure as a practice. And even if you were to look at self-pleasuring as a training grounds to have incredible sex.
That's what you're doing with the YAFAP.
Exactly.
But also, ladies, this is also for you. How we touch our bodies is essentially how we train our bodies to respond in an intimate sexual experience. So if the only time you touch your body is like, I need to get one off, it needs to be quick, and you get a little zap and you buzz out and then you crash, you're literally consistently training your system that that's what happens when you go into a sexual practice. Almost every woman that I've trained in that, I'd say the numbers are in the 90% now, but I've never taken, a quiz or anything, they haven't even touched the inside of their own vaginas.
Yeah.
So they're not familiar with the massive amount of erectile tissue in the erotic landscape that's held predominantly
all the other set
it would
of
be
nerves.
like thinking like the only part of the penis that's worth touching is the head, and you
Yes.
don't you touch any other part. You're not even aware of the root of it. You're not aware of the testicles. Like it's an equivalent to that. So I think that there's a lot here for us to explore of come or not to come, and what does this all mean? And are there side effects for training our bodies to come without ejaculating? Like, I'm just curious about all of that. So,
Well, and this is the thing that I think is really nice about the No Nut November. It's even just by taking the time to not be orgasming or not to be ejaculating, having this refractory period every single day, or just doing this as an experiment of like, well, what just happens for the month? Try something out, see what it's like. I just think that there's another way that this could be done even more intelligently. That means you don't need to actually take yourself sexually offline, because you can notice that if you actually continue to do the sexual stimulation, even after having these ejaculatory, and I'm gonna say a peak orgasm,
okay,
because there's that drop off. This way we
ladies
can be
have
talking
that too.
precisely.
The clitoral orgasm is a peak.
Because this is
The
different than female
ejaculatory
ejaculation.
is the
Yes.
peak. So we're specifically looking at coming as the typical
peak
orgasm. Okay.
So this peak orgasm where you're like, oh, low desire like kicks in, also you're like, don't touch me anymore. There is a psychological component that happens to that, where you literally like also maybe don't want to engage with your partner as much.
Yeah.
Not just physically, but just emotionally, intimately.
Yeah, you almost repulsed. People like can even turn away right immediately after, or for days after.
A lot of people talk about having low energy, maybe being a bit
grumpy,
lethargic, lazy, not wanting then to kind of engage with the rest of life either, like outside of the bedroom. So
and
like
it's not true for everyone. I think everyone's, the way our physiology is individually is really unique. There's a big spectrum, because I've definitely met guys like, it's a really big deal, and they're in that kind of peak mode where it's just a really big deal and they've got to get to that, and then there's nothing. It's just like, it's finished, it's done, forget it. I'm like, forget it? Like, whoa, okay. And then there's other guys where it's like, yeah, I'm good, woohoo, all right, I need
eat a
something,
little bit,
let's go again. I'm like, what? Wow, that's cool. And it's not an age thing. I've not seen it age related. I've seen it. It's just, so we need to learn, like, what is my physiology? How do I respond? How can I work with myself? So No Nut for the men, No Nut November, is more of an invitation to become masterful with your arousal, with your pleasure, with your orgasm.
Well, that's why I call it Nut Mastery, No Nut November, to give that thing. Master your nut, yes.
And then for the ladies, I think it would be an interesting of like, instead of no nut, I guess it could be like no vibe November, because we could, if we had a break from the entrainment of the peak orgasm associated with the clitoris, and could we map out some new ways of experiencing sensation? I think that could be really wonderful.
I mean, maybe it should just be called No Peak November.
I love that. November. So let's talk for a second. A while back we had Dr. Lauren Davis on one of our Instagram lives.
Yes.
And we were both super excited to hear about her medical perspective on orgasm and pleasure. And one of the things that she pointed out to us, we were aware of before, but I just loved the way she succinctly pointed it out.
She put it with the nervous system,
She put it with the nervous system, and how the majority of us, okay, so let's describe the nervous system. There's a sympathetic, which is the arousal side, and that's also what goes online with stress and responding to life.
So
Actually,
fight,
you're
flight,
awake.
fright, or freeze,
Yeah.
and fawning.
But it's also like you need it. You need
Absolutely.
arousal to function. So it's not like a horrible thing. It just, if you're too aroused for too long, it's actually then not great.
And that's where the traditional orgasm happens, is
Exactly.
in the sympathetic state.
But she was also talking about the parasympathetic system, which is actually designed for rest and sex and
Digestion,
and all that.
and when you start to actually get aroused and your erection starts, you actually go into the parasympathetic.
Exactly.
Which is different than how we normally think about it, which is like, let's go ahead and get this up and going.
Yeah. So, what is the impact if we were to look at, if we're typically with the peak orgasm, we start in the parasympathetic, because without that we can't even get an erection, from what I understand, because the blood will not flow to the genitals if you're stressed.
Yes.
So you need a little bit of relaxed arousal in the start, but then we kind of shift into faster and faster breathing, shallower breathing, which is for the physiology of the body that indicates stress. It's the same thing as like running away, and that kind of thing. So then we go into the sympathetic response, which usually pushes people over into that peak orgasm much faster.
I liked the sound effects you did there. It's kind of a little bit hot.
So then how do we combine that where we don't use the sympathetic to get to the orgasm?
Well, first of all, she described the orgasm that happens in the sympathetic state a little bit like overriding your nervous system. If you're kind of like creating that forced orgasm, you're like, I want to have this orgasm, I'm going to make myself have it. Maybe you're really like whyming up the vibrator, or if you're a guy, you just start like really going at it with the death grip on your hand, and like you said, you get the sound effects that you made, and then you're like, and then after that you're like, okay, now I'm done running, like just stop touching, and you just connect.
I just flashed to a video. In Instagram we get a lot of dick pics, but one time I got a dick video.
Okay.
It was like full video, and the guy was going so fast I couldn't actually see his hand. And I was like, you're killing it.
It's like when you see like Superman moving super fast motion, like, or the Flash.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wow, and of course he didn't like my response, but I was responding from, if I was your lover, I would not enjoy you moving like that in my body.
But if you think about it, when you look at porn, like this is something that normally kind of gets lauded. It's harder, faster, bigger is better, and the more friction that you create.
But let's talk about the sympathetic, parasympathetic. Let's talk about the impact in that refractory period. The impact on intimacy, the impact on the body.
So with the parasympathetic, now your body is going more into like how you refer to it, which I think is kind of more graspable by a lot of people, which is this relaxed arousal, meaning that a person is still going into these heightened levels of pleasure, but there's an opportunity to actually co-regulate one another's nervous systems during a sexual experience, as opposed to like shocking the other person into pleasure. Pleasure becomes a more shared experience that starts to have a lot of the health benefits to like stabilizing your nervous system, which is why sometimes people like, they have that fast and furious sex, it's really hot in the moment, but then they're a bit dysregulated, they don't feel that, it kind of becomes, sex literally becomes this itch that needs to get scratched so that it's not a distraction from the rest of life. And when you engage in it sort of more the sympathetic way, it's always kind of held a bit separately.
Yeah, and we're not judging. Like, people have sex the way they have sex. What we're doing though is we're wanting to open the opportunity.
Precisely.
Okay, so you have that kind of response every once in a while. Okay, great.
Adrenaline spikes can be nice. It can be great to have this super hot and heavy quickie. And maybe it starts off as a quickie, but just knowing that you also have the ability to actually regulate whenever you keep hearing the words about, well, you need to make like your things safe for your relationship to really be able to thrive.
Yeah.
And there's an importance to that.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't really get then played out. Like, what does it actually look like in the bedroom?
And it's not just safety for the female, because there's a lot of anxiety that men go through when it comes to sex. And when you're overly using the sympathetic system to push yourself through a sexual experience, you're actually, I think, robbing yourself of a great opportunity. Whereas if you could bring in more of that relaxed arousal and start to feel more and sense more, then some of your anxiety can get more transformed into feeling really centered in your own sexual power.
This is one of the questions we get asked all the time. Is a guy's like, I'm feeling a bit pressured at the end of the day, and all of a sudden I have to now perform, and if I'm not able to get it up, then I'm not really like a man. And then the guys are supposed to get it up, they're supposed to keep it up, and then not go too long and ejaculate when when they need to. And there isn't really that much sense of connection. And if a guy doesn't get it up right away, they can really start to question their own virility, their partner. Sometimes they'll be like, "What's wrong with you? What is it something that I did?" And if you can actually have this more relaxed state where you're happy with your erection not being erect, that you're in a more soft state, and that your partner can really appreciate, love that, still actually stimulate themselves with your soft cock, then you will naturally just again go from this relaxed state, and blood will naturally start to flow down there when it's ready to, because that is the parasympathetic part taking over.
Yes.
And then you can go ahead, get the erection, and go into sex.
What's super intriguing to me about this, if you look at it from the polyvagal theory, is the place that we all thrive, the place where we do the best, is when you have the frontal vagal system activated, which is translated as the social engagement system. So if you imagine you go into distress and you're not accessing that, you're not there. And that's why I think I've always sometimes referred to some sexual experience as mutual masturbation, because it's like two bodies using each other, and it's very dissatisfying, and you kind of feel a little gross or like ashamed or bored or something after, versus actually when you can start having connection first with yourself, starting to feel a lot more, and then starting actually to feel into another person's body, it really does change the arc of where pleasure and orgasm go.
Well, this is what I call the sort of race and chase. And the beautiful thing about is when sex becomes more of a dance as opposed to the race and chase.
What is the race and chase?
The race and chase would be where, one person's racing towards the orgasm, which let's say traditionally that would be the person who's let's say the guy, he's like, "Woo, I'm gonna come." And meanwhile the woman's like, I'm chasing after because it seems to be avoiding me. But frankly, I've heard this completely the other way as well, where the woman's like, "Oh yeah, I got my thing in 30 seconds," and then the guy's like,
"I'm good,"
and he's like, "Oh, but I've just started the engine up." But we just recently had this at a workshop where a couple was talking about this, and whereas if it becomes a dance, then you will have phases where you're more in that parasympathetic state, but then everything will go into this sympathetic state as well, where it gets super exciting, bodies start to move, you get this, we're not also saying it just has to be slow and monotonous sex. No, there's that spike that happens, but then as opposed to having that crash and it being over, you can go back to that place of plateauing and being in the parasympathetic, enjoying one another, and then having it go up again. But it's more of a dance, and one can be leading, one can be following, but there's a sort of rhythm that happens there, and it gets to have its own cadence, its own tempo that is unique to that moment and to the couple that are experiencing it.
I think maybe what's more commonly known than say the terms relaxed arousal would be flow state. I think a lot of people now understand flow state, and it's an extraordinary place to end up in, whether you're a runner or a dancer or an artist or really anybody doing the thing that they love, entering that flow state. And in that space, it's like time ceases to exist and you start accessing different things. And relaxed arousal is a combination of being awake, being present, being engaged, but also being relaxed in that engagement.
I mean, you're a dancer, so I love how you make all these dance analogies. I imagine this would be where you just go out on the dance floor and you're doing all of these super energetic movements, and you're maybe coordinated with the person or not, but it's just a ton of energy and you get quite tired quickly, versus your bodies get in tune with each other and then there is this sort of flow. Things get a little bit more timeless. You're kind of in this altered state.
Yeah.
You don't know how long it goes, but it can speed up, it can slow down.
Sometimes you want it to go on forever.
And so that, I think, is for people to get that idea of what that flow state is, or maybe if you're an athlete or a musician, where you just like become one with the music or the sport that you're doing, and you're not noticing this huge effort because your body literally relaxes into it, even though from the outside there's complete adaptability.
I just want to make that clear that relaxed arousal isn't sleeping. Relaxed arousal can be a beautiful hike up a mountain where you're really engaged in moving your body, but you're doing it from a really relaxed place. You're not forcing anything, so your body's actually experiencing rejuvenation in the act of engagement.
So before we switch over...
Oh, I can't wait. I have so many stories.
Definitely this is going to be good because, well, what are some of the things that we're going to talk about in the next...
Well, I would like to explore what is the downside of just having one orgasm, because sometimes that's only one person has an orgasm, and then, or maybe both are only having the one.
We're going to talk about that in this part or the next part?
The next part.
Okay.
And then... one of the things that seems to be important to me as a lover is how do I support my partner when he has released the ejaculate? So not just orgasm, but ejaculated. What is that post-coming care? How do I support rebuilding a sexual charge? Because that's the part that's very interesting for me. So I'd love to talk about that. There's definitely going to be some interesting stories. I have quite a few stories.
Also, you had mentioned too that you wanted to talk about how to actually support a partner during the sexual experience.
Yeah, so there's a couple of phases where initially, if your partner's learning to last longer, you're going to need to adapt some of your movement. You're not denying yourself pleasure or denying yourself sensation, but adapt your movement, becoming so sensitive and aware of what's happening with the movement of the bodies that your movements become something that actually uplift and support your partner instead of limiting them.
And also that comes with then adapting the way that you directly experience pleasure as well, because you're not going into that sympathetic, which has a tendency to drive the other person there.
Yeah.
But we'll go into some of the how of that.
And then I wanted to add to that, once you've achieved that, you can actually then go into challenging your partner so that they can...
All right, well, we gotta save these things.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I want to do that. And then I actually think we should share a technique. I think we should definitely share what can support all bodies to move through this kind of like peak thing and start extending pleasure so that everyone's at choice as to when they want the experience to stop.
Of course, then we'll have the audio clip that we'll be talking about how to do this as well, or not talking, doing it.
But I definitely have a wild story about how peak orgasm completely flatlined me, and I was shocked, and I was...
Well, don't give it away. Let's
I'm
say
not to say I'm going to talk about it.
You're going to get me really excited
let's
here.
Just switch over.
No, because before we do, I sort of want to talk about then on the relational level, like why would somebody maybe do a practice of having this no peak November?
Master your nut November.
Yes, exactly.
Master your vibe.
And this is something that really, we touched on it briefly, that when you have that prolactin, it cuts off the prolactin spike that starts to increase. It shuts off your desire.
Turns dopamine right down.
Turns dopamine down, prolactin goes up, and your sexual desire, like also you go into a state of like more low desire for your partner, which is both sexual, but also we've had so many couples speak about, it's as if the charge between the two of them kind of flatlines or dissipates. Or if you're not looking at that, it doesn't really dissipate things, playing and looking at it the other way is that this is an ability to engage with one another and actually build up that charge. And that's why I think it's important when you do this, as opposed to just focusing on no nut, as opposed to like nut mastery or master your nut November, or learning to as a woman to be able to have these experiences where you're then not having that peak orgasm, even if you're just testing it out for that month, is looking at like the positive side of things, which is, whoa, does this actually optimize and like increase the charge? Maybe you don't notice the charge goes down that much or at all, but can you actually increase this charge? And so look at this as a practice as opposed to avoiding the down. It's like, well, how can I make what we have even more sensational, even more incredible? And just experiment with it, like instead of all of November, try for November to do every 3 days, if
Yeah,
this is something that
exactly.
you do, or maybe every week or two. But the key here, though, is to actually have a sexual practice during November and then see how long you
During
can
any
increase.
month, because someone might be in July right now listening to this.
I know, any month, but
Yeah.
since November's the month that has been chosen, then at least, if you're listening to this now, then try this out as an experiment. But again, you don't need to wait till November. Christmas is quite good too.
Yeah, I mean,
Christmas doesn't
any
have to come
time of
once
the
a year.
year, it's a great time to extend pleasure, explore pleasure, and understand that you're just starting to access a vast erotic landscape.
Well, let's go ahead then and switch on over.
Okay.
To join us for the complete and explicit version of the podcast, simply upgrade your membership and gain instant access.